The Kokoda track counteroffensive, which took place from November 1942 to January 1943, was a critical phase of the Kokoda track campaign in the Pacific War. It marked the turning point in the battle for New Guinea, where Australian forces successfully pushed back the Japanese Imperial Army after months of intense fighting along the treacherous Kokoda track. This counteroffensive played a key role in the Allied success in the Pacific, halting Japan's attempt to capture Port Moresby and significantly weakening its position in the region. Strategic context. In early 1942, the Japanese sought to capture Port Moresby, a vital strategic location in Papua New Guinea, as part of their broader plan to secure the Pacific and threaten Australia. Japanese forces advanced along the Kokoda track, a narrow and rugged mountain trail, with the goal of reaching Port Moresby from the north. The Japanese troops, however, faced fierce resistance from Australian soldiers, who had limited supplies and were suffering from the harsh conditions of the jungle. By September 1942, the Japanese had reached Iorabewa, just 32 kilometers from Port Moresby, but their offensive stalled due to heavy casualties, logistical challenges, and an effective defense by the Australian forces. The arrival of Allied reinforcements, including troops from Papua New Guinea, gave the Australians the strength to launch a counteroffensive and push the Japanese back along the track. Counteroffensive. The Australian 1st and 7th Divisions, with the support of Papuan carriers and Allied air support, launched their counterattack in October 1942. The counteroffensive targeted the Japanese forces that had been stretched thin along the Kokoda track. The Japanese, suffering from malnutrition, disease, and exhaustion, were unable to mount an effective defense against the well-coordinated Australian assault. The Australians used their knowledge of the harsh jungle terrain to their advantage, setting ambushes and employing guerrilla tactics to wear down the Japanese. The counteroffensive was also supported by Allied naval and air superiority, which allowed for effective supply drops and provided critical intelligence. By early November 1942, the Japanese forces began retreating along the Kokoda track, and the Australians began to recapture key positions, including the town of Kokoda. The Japanese withdrawal was compounded by continuous Allied air and naval attacks, which hindered their ability to regroup and reorganize. Outcome and significance. By January 1943, the Japanese forces had been pushed out of the Kokoda track area and were retreating to the northern coast of New Guinea. The Kokoda track counteroffensive was a decisive victory for the Australian Army and a turning point in the Pacific War. The successful repulsion of the Japanese offensive secured Port Moresby and prevented a Japanese invasion of Australia. The victory also had significant strategic implications, as it marked the first time the Japanese had been forced to retreat in the Pacific, setting the stage for further Allied offensives in the region. It demonstrated the effectiveness of Allied cooperation between Australian, American, and Papuan forces and showed that Japan's expansion in the Pacific could be halted. The Kokoda track counteroffensive was a critical moment in the Pacific campaign, highlighting the harsh realities of jungle warfare and the resilience of the Australian forces. The success of the counteroffensive boosted morale in the Pacific and was a key step in the eventual Allied victory over Japan. It also underscored the importance of Guadalcanal, New Guinea, and the broader Southwest Pacific as key theaters in the struggle for control of the Pacific region.